In the heart of Yuanhai City, rising up between towering skyscrapers, stood the city's first central hospital. In the first ophthalmology department, Dr. Xiao sat in his office to talk with Zhang Yu and learn what was happening with the young man. The doctor stared hard at the paper, searching for a mistake in the young man's diagnosis, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Confused, Zhang tried to figure out if he was from the past and why his sight was failing, while the doctor asked him to explain his symptoms once more. He rubbed his face and explained that his eyes weren't seeing clearly, so his vision wasn't perfect. When he opened his eyes wide, a strange ache took hold, and the tiny blood vessels in his face started to burst from the pressure. When he stared at something, a red line would flash by, and the doctor sitting there would vanish into a thick red fog. As the doctor leaned in to listen closely to Zhang, the patient saw the whole world turn red. Suddenly, his eyes locked onto a strange scale hanging right above the medic, but everything was washed in red, making the writing impossible to read. Squeezing his eyes shut tight, the hero stared at the scale, showing 18%, and tried to figure out what it meant. He opened his eyes, squinted at the strange numbers on the chart, and in a daze asked, "Is that the doctor's age?" Shurao was shocked by the young man's words and couldn't believe it was possible, so he thought the patient had ended up in the wrong department. Thinking about the signs, the protagonist realized his thoughts on death weren't quite right, and just then, the doctor asked if the guy had been drinking, but Zhang was lost in thought and told him to wait a moment. The doctor stared at the client's diagnosis with irritation but stayed quiet and closed his eyes, letting the world around him fade away as he lost himself in thought. After a moment, Jin opened his eyes, apologized to the doctor for getting distracted, but the man stayed silent while clutching his head, and Zhao told the young man to focus on himself instead of his question. The doctor pulled a flashlight from his pocket, shone it into the patient's eyes to check his vision, and confirmed the diagnosis written in the report. The doctor gently pried the doctor's eyes open and asked Zhenong to look around, which he did without hesitation. Zhao stood there holding a flashlight, confused because the man's eyes looked perfectly normal despite everything being wrong. After the bright light, he closed his eyes to rest a bit before heading home. When Zhang opened his eyes again, a tiny red stranger stared back from within his own pupil, yet the doctor missed it completely. Walking down the crowded hallway past doctors and other patients, the hero kept seeing everything through a red veil until he suddenly spotted something strange, froze, and tried to figure out what was happening. Above the crowd, scales formed in the air, each showing a strange percentage nobody could understand. He grinned with joy as his eye swelling vanished, leaving him with bright vision and a heart full of health. As he walked away, he realized the bar showed how much blood was left and started thinking a way to use this for something helpful. Near the hospital, a billboard depicted a wild fight between humans and all kinds of monsters. He walked out of the building with confidence, took a quick look around, and made his way home to get some rest. It was said that to stay safe, the night watch team was going to start hiring new guards to work the night shift. By the 99th year after the Great Disaster, the others started running for safety, but people managed to build a place where they could finally live without fear. Not too far from the tall buildings, drones buzzed endlessly overhead, watching everything closely to keep track of what was going on. Zhang couldn't hide his surprise as he took a quick look around, realizing he needed to check his surroundings before heading back home. He walked through the busy streets, lost in his own thoughts, and didn't even notice the people around him. Looking down, he saw his sneaker laces had come untied and were dragging on the ground, making it hard to walk. To stay hidden, Jin quickly knelt down and tied a tight knot with the shoelace into a bow. Clutching a cigarette between his teeth, he struggled to make sense of his strange, blurry vision and the weird world spinning around him. Suddenly, a strange chat between strangers pulled him from his thoughts, but then the hero felt other forces near, staggered as if weighed down, and nearly fell on the street as if hit by lightning, with an unknown power piercing him from all sides while Zhang stood frozen in shock. As he fought to stand, the man felt his body acting up and giving him strange pain. Zhang felt tense and terrified, confused by strange feelings he had never known before. The boy's pupils suddenly showed a dark, black shape of a boy trying to crawl out, just like before. He rolled his eyes in shock, completely confused by the strange look of pressure in the other man's eyes. A giant green moon popped up between the tall buildings, casting a weird bright green glow on everything around it. Zhang stood still and stared at the light, wondering what would happen next. Suddenly, a warrior girl dropped from the sky right beside the young man, completely catching him off guard, and he had no idea what would happen next. The warrior girl and a strange creature fought high in the sky as she swung her weapon in every direction. Jin stood frozen below, staring up in awe as she tried to make sense of the chaos above her. Soon enough, a wild brawl erupted around the guy, with warriors and monsters fighting each other. They swung their weapons with all the strength they had to fight off the monsters and save the city. As the hero looked up at the green light, he suddenly saw that the world was full of big dangers and wasn't nearly as safe as it had seemed before. As he stared up at the moon, a giant scale appeared above it, sending a wave of panic through him and making him realize his time was running out. Soon the rain started to fall, with drops of all kinds slipping down between the tall buildings. A drop landed right in Jang's eye, dampening his lashes and blurring his vision like a wet curtain. He stood right beneath the rain, ignoring the wetness as he tried to make sense of what he had just seen and figure out his next move. Jang squeezed his eyes shut, trying to find the strength to keep going, but a raindrop landed right on his forehead. The city was alive and buzzing, with everyone rushing past each other, heads down in their own world and ignoring the crowds around them. Jenong crossed the road and hurried toward his home, refusing to let the people passing by distract him. One of the girls shouted about a special deal in the store, but nobody stopped to listen. As he helped his grandfather cross the street, the boy grinned and reminded him to watch both ways for safety. Jin paused in the city, realizing the night patrol had truly saved their world, while a nearby merchant tried to sell bottles to a passerby, only to be met with angry stares from the crowd. Walking down the street, John kept telling himself the world was safe and the scary feelings were just in his head. As the bright sun dipped between the buildings, the guy looked at the scale again and started to think safety might just be a lie. Suddenly, a heavy hand grabbed his shoulder and yanked him close, making Jang tense up even more. He spun around and spotted a merchant holding out a wooden box filled with medicine. The man beamed with a wide grin, telling him that his special medicines were just like the official ones. John pinched his nose against the sharp smell, feeling like the drugs were monsters he couldn't understand why anyone would sell. The merchant opened his box, promised he had everything needed, and showed off all his different bottles. The young man sneered, "Is this really free?" while the merchant just waved him off and turned to leave, completely unaware of where the monsters had come from. Jang caught up to the merchant, laughed to say it was just a joke, and asked if he had any divine oil. As the sun dipped below the city skyline, the bus rolled slowly down the streets, sticking to its path without missing a beat. After buying a bottle of divine oil, Jang sat on the bus wondering if he had paid too much for it since it cost 3,000 W. As he watched the sunset through the window, he finally saw that this was just a normal street and admitted he had been too suspicious yesterday. As the bus drew closer to the stop, it slowed down and came to a halt, waking up the passengers and getting ready to open the doors. The bus was so full at South Street that the driver told everyone to get ready to jump off. Suddenly, Jung felt that strange jolt hit his body again, like a shock of electricity, leaving him completely confused about what was happening. Peering out the window, he saw only his own pale face in the glass, with nobody around, and that familiar chill of fear swept over him once more. Suddenly, the crowd vanished and a scary green fog covered everything, leaving John still standing on the bus. Shocked, he jerked his eyes open, scrambling to make sense of everything and pull himself together. He glanced around quickly and saw that everything was just normal, with passengers still seated as the bus kept rolling forward. Jang noticed this was the second time it happened, so he tried to make sense of his weird dreams, but he just couldn't figure them out. As the bus rolled to a halt near the next stop, the young man knew he needed to keep his eyes open on the ride home. As the city grew dark, Jang stepped into his high-rise apartment near the center. White towels hung on the bathroom radiator, ready for use, and despite living alone, his place was spotless. As he dried off after his shower, he felt a real rush of happiness at finally being able to freshen up after a long hospital stay and take a walk around the city. Suddenly, he looked into the mirror and saw a strange mark on his chest that he couldn't figure out, and he was totally shocked by how it had appeared. The young man felt his chest and suddenly remembered seeing something like this in a book from home. He recalled how, just a few days ago, he had shined a flashlight across the bookshelves looking for a comic book. Suddenly, books flew at his head, and he cursed as he tried to shield himself from the surprise attack. The books lined up on the shelves suddenly broke free and fell like a storm, hitting the hero on the head and making him stumble back in shock. Now his body glowed with a strange light, and he guessed that the marks on his chest had appeared because the heavy books had crashed down on him. A sudden, sharp pain struck him, knocking him down to his knees in the bathroom while he gasped for air, trying to figure out what just happened. As Jang touched the pattern on his chest, a burning pain surged through him, making him feel like his insides were on fire, and he couldn't make sense of what was happening to him. To numb his burning pain, the young man turned on the shower and quickly stepped under the cool water. John closed his eyes and took a deep breath as the cool water washed away his tension and burning pain. He stood up to take a cooling shower, watching the burning pain fade until his skin was calm again. A dark rhythm pulsed in his chest like a chip, while above him, a strange scale with its own markings hung in the mirror. When Jang saw the number 100 on the scale, he instantly knew what it meant and nodded to himself with a small smile. After stepping out of the shower, the guy walked to the door, leaving a strange, steamy path of wet air and mist in his wake. He felt something odd, spun around with a gasp, and stared in shock at a sight he had never seen before in all his days. Jung looked around in terror to find that he cast no shadow at all. Terrified, the young man screamed in confusion, not knowing where the shadow had vanished or what it meant, and he feared it was just the start of something terrible. The hero bounced all over the bathroom looking for his shadow, but it was gone, and Jang was furious. After a while, the young man spotted it on the wall and let out a sigh of relief, glad that the strange things happening to him lately were finally over. He let out a big sigh and walked out of the bathroom, tired of all the weird stuff happening lately. As the hero pulled the door open, he didn't know what was waiting on the other side, leaving him equal parts thrilled and terrified. When he walked out of the bathroom, his own huge black shadow stood right in front of him, looking scary in the dark. With eyes that glowed, it fixed its gaze on the stunned guy who couldn't look away from what he had just seen. Even though the shadow had no clear face, it showed interest by staring hard and slowly tilting its head at the guy. Jin studied the shadow from head to toe, trying to make sense of the chaos and steady his nerves, but his mind was a jumbled mess. Feeling the cold tiles under his bare feet brought him back to reality, forcing him to stop panicking and instead smile as he decided that living with and watching his reflection would be surprisingly fun. His heart hammered wildly as he realized the shadow was alive and burning with power, yet Zhang stepped into the hallway, keeping a safe distance while the shadow watched him from afar. As the hero puzzled over the shadow, evening crept over the city and the tall buildings began to glow as their lights turned on. Behind his dark apartment door, Zhang secretly tested the strange powers hidden within his shadow to see just how dangerous it could be. The shadow loomed above the man, grinning with arms hanging loose from its tall form. Zhang carefully picked which shadow powers to try and told the shadow to lift its right hand. She raised her hand to wave at the guy, just like he told her to, and those tasks felt way too easy. Zhang's heart raced as the shadow obeyed, so he asked her to lift her left leg to see just how strong she really was. As she lifted her arms and legs one after another, the shadow bent and danced, finding happiness in the simplest moments. Zhang chuckled at the funny wiggles in his mirror reflection while wondering what else to ask her to do. The shadow locked eyes with the guy, who in turn gazed back at it while inventing new jobs for them to do. She crossed her arms to activate her social shaking power, ready to shake her very soul. She felt like she was on a dance floor under the bright lights, so she struck a pose and got ready to move. Her hands clapped along to the imaginary music, cheering herself on like she was at her own show. Jin felt a headache creeping in, his head buzzing so hard he wondered if everything he'd seen was just a dream. Suddenly, a strange light erupted in his chest, blasting upward from where the mysterious chip pattern used to be, leaving him frozen in shock as the glow shot out of him. A massive yellow sphere floated in the air, looking just like the sun with dark letters and strange symbols written all over its glowing surface. Slowly, a big letter E began to appear in the middle of the ball, but nobody knew what it meant. Seeing the window with its special traits brought a surge of joy, for now he could finally boost the shadow's power. I spotted the plus signs at the bottom of the window, clicked one just to see what would happen, but nothing changed at all. The system showed that the shadow was just him, acting like Jung, but without any awareness. While the hero studied the markings, a shadow danced behind him, and the guy was shocked to see it. With glowing blue eyes, the shadow watched the man silently, waiting without a word for his next orders. Jung asked with clear curiosity if the shadow held all of his past memories and hoped it might give him special powers. It was as if the shadow had already heard the question, nodding to show it knew everything its master suspected. The boy dashed to the desk, flailing his arms in a wild gesture while the shadow watched from behind. After a moment, the hero scribbled a long equation on a scrap of paper and called out for the shadow to come take a look. Zhang passed the pen into the shadow's hand, explained that it was a summer homework, and hoped the shadow could solve it. Worried that the shadow couldn't keep the pen from falling, Zhang doubted herself until he picked it up and proved her fears wrong. Jung poked the shadow's head with his fingers, wondering if there were many hidden spirits inside her and wanting to test her even further. On the paper showing the equation, Shadow just scribbled the word decided, quietly turned to her master, and waited for her next orders. Jin was shocked and asked why the shadow couldn't write anything even though it had the same powers as he did. Again, the shadow wrote decided but left out the equation's answer, So an angry Jung tossed down his pen, whipped the rolled paper like a weapon, and shouted that he could solve it in just 2 minutes. Remembering how the system worked, the boy realized the task was too hard, took a deep breath to calm down, and asked her to draw a horse instead. With a steady hand, the shadow dipped the pen and sketched a horse onto the paper, moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. With a deafening hum, it kept drawing power while Jang marveled at its strength, convinced it could make a fortune. To his surprise, the boy found that the shadow understood him perfectly and even had a knack for drawing. Now, curious, Jang turned to the system window to learn more about the system. Seeing that the shadow could bite made me eager to learn more and open extra windows. Once I read the explanation, I realized that eating others gives you shadow points and helps you grow stronger. Not knowing exactly what the power did, I reached out to grab a shadowed object and steal its shadow. Deciding to try his new skill, the young man looked around carefully, wondering what he could use. Walking to the corner of the room, John crouched down and saw his shadow on the floor, then stretched out his hand to think about how to use it and what it could do, wondering if he should take any action. Jung opened his palms and held them out, ready to use the shadow bite to boost his own power. As he clenched his arms and felt a strange tingle, nothing around him moved and nothing changed. With sweat dripping down his face, the hero grew angry because no one told him how to use the skill. Then, a system message popped up that shocked the guy so much he couldn't help but stare in awe. It warned that the guy's eyes would change, and turning on his power would finally show him the dark side of the world. Remembering the past, it's hard to believe that the heroes who fought monsters were actually the world's dark side. Staring at his hands, the young man felt a strange tingling but quickly shook it off to test out the powers of the shadow. While the shadow kept drawing at the desk, Jang asked her to stop and do some push-ups for a break. The shadow spun around with a confused look, clearly puzzled by what the young man wanted and why he was bothering it. As it rose, its limbs faded into a dark, shapeless blob that sank into the floor like someone was pulling it into an unknown abyss unknown to Jang. Soon, only a black spark was left where the shadow used to be, and the hero, angry and shouting, demanded to know where it had gone. As the boy faced the shadow, night dropped over the city, and the stars and moon lit up the rooftops. Stepping into the room, Jang took a careful look around and asked the shadow to show itself again, hoping it would finally explain what it was doing. Just as he was watching, a tiny whirlwind suddenly materialized in front of him and slowly faded into a shadow. Soon, a shadow dropped from the sky in front of the hero, hesitating to trust its master, which annoyed Jang and made him wonder if it had just run away from him. He grabbed a notebook, scribbled that the shadow had lived on the dark side, and the guy instantly asked what it had been doing there. Tearing a fresh page from her notebook, the shadow told her master she'd just been doing push-ups, not listening to his complaints. After a brief pause, Jang realized the shadow's training would be best on the dark side of the world, so he waved his hand and told her to keep going. The shadow blinked its glowing eyes wide, stared at the guy without knowing what he wanted, and shifted as if waiting for orders. Just as the shadow vanished and settled into a small, dark lump on the floor, Jang stared at it, shocked by what he'd just seen. Slowly, the giant shadow shrank down to a tiny drop and vanished, leaving the boy with just a cold shiver on his skin. Feeling nervous, Jang busied himself while the shadow practiced on the dark side, waiting for it to come back. Sitting down at the table, the guy settled into his chair and laid out his notebooks before diving into his homework. Jang picked up his pen and resolved to get to work, ignoring the weird things happening to him. Morning came with a bright sun lighting up the sky and white pigeons flying nearby to create a peaceful feeling. Inside the guy's room, a computer with a massive screen and keyboard sat on the table, though the screen was dark and switched off. Jang fell fast asleep at the table with a pen still in his hand, dreaming a sweet dream where he laughed hard at something so funny it felt real. Saliva dripped from the guy's mouth as he smiled, lost in a daydream about other girls, completely unaware of what was happening. A sudden knock on the door woke the young man, who slowly opened his eyes and wondered who could be disturbing him so early in the morning. Jang felt heavy and numb, realizing he was exhausted from sleeping in a bad position all night. On the other side of the door, someone shouted at the young man while frantically tugging the handle, desperate to get in and refusing to wait. Jin opened the door with a lazy drag and saw her childhood sweetheart, Lu, standing there, which instantly made her feel irritated as always. When a guy looked up and saw a bloody scale hovering over the girl's head, he was totally shocked because he had never seen anything like it before. Noticing the bar sat at 93%, the hero paused to figure out what went wrong and why the girl was bleeding, desperate to find the source of the trouble. Jang just took a quick look at the calendar on the wall and instantly knew everything, realizing it was all tied to those special days that happened to every girl. She ignored the guy and walked into the room, glued to her phone, leaving him surprised by her early arrival. Lu didn't even look up from her phone as she urged the guy to hurry and lectured him on his confusing new business tale. Her friend, eyes still glued to her phone, asked Jang to share more about his idea because it sounded really interesting. Suddenly, a loud bang made the girl drop her phone in fright. Lu turned to the guy, shouting that slamming the door so loud was crazy and that they should just forget about talking business. The heavy thud above the door smashed the plaster and made the wooden frame groan in protest. Staring at his own fist in shock, John couldn't believe his hands were so strong they could actually break the wood. Lu stared at the guy with equal surprise, unable to hide her genuine amazement at what he'd done with just one single hit. Young spun around as her eyes locked on him, still awestruck by his brand new and weird powers. The strange changes in his body left him realizing his muscles were now packed with incredible power and felt as hard as stone. Her friend saw her clutching her head in pain and realized just how hard training was for him, wondering where those huge muscles had come from. Lu reached out and touched his arm, feeling how powerful and stretchy his muscles were, like they were made of steel. She didn't hide her annoyance as she asked John what he'd done to his body and why he hadn't told her about it before. He waved his friend off, saying he'd done a few exercises, though he knew the shadow training had already changed him, especially when he lifted. As the girl scanned his body, she knew he was faking it because no one could carve out that many abs in a single workout. The guy got really annoyed and told the girl to be quiet, insisting he wasn't going to do anything illegal or dangerous. Lu's long nails glinted as her hand suddenly darted toward the young man, looking ready to strike. Anger. Lu seized Jang's arm with a sudden move that made him cry out in shock, fearing she was reaching for a weapon. Suddenly, the girl pulled out a bracelet that glowed with a soft blue light and showed some tiny chips on its screen. Lee fastened the bracelet to the man's arm and told him to stay still so the device could measure his pollution level, while her friend stared intently and explained that murder, hate, and strange objects are all forms of contamination. Jang was scared his shadow was a sign of being tainted, but Lu told him that letting things pile up can push us apart. Jang smiled as he noticed the strange guide on his chest was the source of his power and wondered if it would help him. Suddenly, a spark of electricity shot through him and hit his chest, leaving the young man confused by the strange feeling. Jang spun around to see Lu pointing a gun at him and got scared, thinking she was really going to shoot. Jang clenched his teeth in anger, vowing to keep his powers secret from Lu and stop whatever was about to go wrong. He glanced at the bracelet on his wrist, only to see that the tiny chips were still showing the same unchanging numbers. She spun the gun to find it clean, and the hero smiled while asking if she truly meant to shoot him. Jung let out a breath of relief, feeling relaxed and sure that the danger had slipped past him harmlessly this time. Lu lowered her weapon and explained that her father had taught her to be careful in everything and never trust people. He thought back to his drawings and asked the girl if she wanted to check them out right now, while they had some free time. Lee eagerly begged Jang to show her his drawings, her heart racing with excitement since she had always loved his unique and creative style. Behind the doors, he told the girl to hold the paints because he was afraid they might leak and ruin the drawings. Feeling annoyed, the girl still demanded to see the drawings, and her loud cries echoed across the entire neighborhood. After a moment, Jing crawled under the bed knowing he was about to be caught, yet he still managed to trick and confuse Lu. Zhang decided to peek at his shadow secrets, so he opened the system window and started scanning the numbers on the screen. As the shadow grew stronger, the hero watched the screen with a mix of awe and surprise. The screen displayed Jang's shadowboxing with dumbbells and other gear, making her feel like she'd been training all night. Feeling strange sensations, Jang grabbed his groin to figure out what was wrong, just as a tiny black flame suddenly appeared on the floor and slowly shifted its shape. As the young boy reached out his hand, he watched his shadow appear and whispered that he could feel the results of her long training. He grinned and said that push-ups alone wouldn't cut it, so he told us to make every exercise harder. With a big smile, the shadow happily said yes to making the training program much harder. The hero squeezed his fists tight and told the shadow to lie down, ready to start a long and tough training session. With his arms stretched wide, the character ordered the shadow to leap and pose like a dancer, and the shadow moved instantly without asking why. The shadow trained hard, doing push-ups as the guy gave orders, and he truly enjoyed the workout. He eagerly pushed the shadow into harder and more intense practice. Meanwhile, Lu hid behind the door, listening to the guy who had no idea someone was sneaking a peek at him from the hallway. Holding the envelope, she realized her friend was training all along and that she had just overthought and confused herself. Smiling with relief and quiet joy, the girl headed home, knowing her boyfriend was strong and everything would be fine, eager to read her favorite comics and drink warm tea. After training, Jang walked it off and remembered that the shadow had first shown up on January 20th, exactly 99 years since the big disaster started. He noticed that his body felt no pain after training, only a surge of growing strength and fresh energy. By the second day, with more workouts, the muscles started to look even sharper and stronger. He looked down at his body, pleased that it had come together so easily without him pushing himself too hard. Putting on gloves and flailing his arms, he thought he could knock Liu out in one punch, so he chose to train even harder. Uncle Lee, a former night watch soldier who lost an arm in an attack, but kept his old strength and confidence, stopped by to pay us a visit. A few days later, he understood he had to build his own strength and stamina instead of just depending on the shadow. The next day, while the hero boredly scrolled through his phone, the shadow kept training hard and loved every second of it. 4 days after, the shadow kept training while Jang did the chores around the house. A week later, the guy tried to do push-ups while the shadow trained, but he found the exercise way too hard too quickly. After Jang checked the system data, he found only 8 shadow points and thought it was really strange. The screen showed the shadow's traits and the human points you could earn to grow. Seeing how slow his progress was, the guy figured reaching that next evolution level was going to be really tough. After a brief pause, he chose to dive into the dark realm, and a swirling vortex of shadows instantly rose around his feet. It felt like he was sinking into the ground as the shadow slowly wrapped around him, dragging Jang down into the darkness. Half of his body had slid into the shadows, yet he felt no fear, only a quiet peace as he accepted what was coming. A moment later, just a small, flickering shadow stayed where John had been, marking the spot he left behind. He dove into the dark, his body falling through an endless void that seemed to have no bottom or edge. The hero opened his eyes with determination to see what was going on in the dark, gloomy room around him. Looking around, he realized he was in his room, but now it was wrapped in thick shadows and darkness. The young man jumped and landed on the street in the dark world he had chosen to enter. Jang gazed at the towering skyscrapers that looked both familiar and strangely wrong to him. The street was empty and gloomy, with not a single living soul among the huge buildings. Jang remembered how hard it was for him to leave the room, and realized that to reach the dark side, he would have to step out of reality. He turned his head to look at the buildings and cars, realizing that everything looked just like the real world. Jin walked down the street, the world around her too dark to see the shadow creeping up behind her before she realized it. Jang froze instantly, as if he could feel unseen eyes watching him, and fear shot through his whole body. Slowly, he figured out it was the shadows messing with his head, so he forced himself to be brave and look at her. The boy turned around with a sly grin and asked if the shadow had come to meet him and get to know him. The giant shadow bared its tiny, sharp teeth and let out a fierce growl, looking like it was ready to jump at any second. A monster rushed at Jang so fast that he was completely surprised and didn't see this coming. Trapped and unable to fight back, the character cursed as the shadow monster grinned with terrifying red eyes and prepared to strike. With a single powerful blow, the shadow knocked the guy down, leaving Jang stumbling back, his body instantly filled with fear. The shadow swung again and again without stopping, but the hero guessed its moves and kept dodging. Panting hard, John cursed and twisted his body into new positions to dodge fresh attacks. Recalling the shadow's badge, the man grabbed it to stop the monster's new attacks, just as the beast swooped down like a dark cloak to swallow the scared boy. Jang leaped straight into the shadowy emblem, desperate to break free and leave the dark world behind as fast as he could. His body dropped back into the dark void, and for a moment he floated in silence with no feelings left. After crashing to the floor of the tall building with a sharp, painful thud, the young boy knew the fall had been terrible, but he was finally back in the real world. Feeling like a tiny kid, he pulled down his pants and saw his bottom was scratched up from the fight he had on the ground. The young man pressed his hand to his chest, realizing he was terrified and couldn't figure out where the shadow had come from or why it decided to attack him. He grinned at the cuts on his skin and the torn jacket, realizing that his shadow training had made him far more agile. Remembering the small folding stool beneath his hand, the hero reached out to grab it, praying it would save him. Jung gripped his stool with determination, knowing he couldn't just let things stay the way they were. Remembering how he fought the creature on January 28th with nothing but a stool to defend himself, the guy finally realized he had lost. The next day, he came back to that spot to take revenge, only to get a hard hit to his chest that nearly broke every bone in his body. In the next fight, he took 3 deep cuts to his butt, But even while fighting hard, he managed to get his blood back. On January 31st, Lu chose to rest at home and treated his sore bottom with confused movements, spreading healing ointment on his wounds. The girl nervously asked if Zhang had been fighting a lot, but her friend smiled and said she didn't get it because scars were just what made a man look like a man. Elle softly struck the guy and asked if he thought those butthole scars were hot, while Jung yelled that it really hurt. She said with anger that if he hurt now, it meant his body would heal soon. Jung turned to the girl, told her only a month remained, and asked Lu what she planned to do next. His friend, confused by the stranger's words, asked in surprise what special event was just 1 month away. While sitting on the sofa, Zhang reminded her that the exam was only a month away and asked if she had forgotten it. For years, even the arts and fun stuff didn't do well because of the big trouble. Those who kept chasing the arts became outcasts in a world that couldn't understand or accept their values. Nobody cared about fun anymore. Everyone just stared at the massive street screens to watch warriors battle monsters. To become part of the fighting patrol, you had to pass a martial arts test, and once you did, your life would never be the same again. Zhang and Lu sat in the room, talking about what was happening around them, the state of the world, and the big exam coming up. As the girl carefully cleaned the scrapes on his hand, she made it crystal clear that she had no interest in getting into any fights or protests. She pressed her lips together, thinking about the dream she'd quietly held in her heart for years, keeping it a secret from everyone. Lu finally admitted she wanted to follow her music dreams, even though she knew the world wouldn't support her. The hero, full of surprise, told me that she could learn to play music, even though her father might not agree. Zhang figured that with Uncle Lee's powerful backing in the Night Watch, Lu could chase his music dreams without anything bad happening. She pressed the ointment out of the bottle and gently tended to Zhang's wounds, doing her best not to hurt him. Lu spoke with annoyance that her father wouldn't agree, and her friend asked what she'd do if he said no. As she rubbed ointment on his wound, her friend whispered to him to keep her political confession a secret because the world had changed so much. While tending to the wound, Lu announced that anyone could now sign up for the martial arts exam. Even more shocked, the guy asked if Lu really respected her principles, given that she could have easily passed the exam. As I blew on the wound, my friend warned that pressure was mounting on the Night Watch, but insisted with confidence that she would ace the exam. After giving it some thought, I finally saw that Lu's amazing skills made perfect sense of her bold confidence. On exam day, with weapons all around, the hero felt terrified of failing. He pressed a hand to his chest, terrified that failing the exam would send him straight to a prison camp. Suddenly, an idea hit him, and he asked the girl to lend him her detector without telling her why he needed it. Not knowing why, Lu said he only needed the thing to find others and told Zhang to run once he met them. Surprised that the girl called the others special, Zhang asked again, and Lu calmly confirmed her words. Lu stared at her friend, who was so lost in thought he didn't say a word. After bandaging her wounds, her friend was ready to go, but Zhang stopped her, saying that her family knew everything about everyone. Lu felt her stomach drop when she saw the young man had decided to take the exam, but he just laughed and reminded her of what she had said, prompting her surprise friend to step closer, as Jung declared he would take the test and draw comics about everyone else in the future. Lu was so shocked by his words that he demanded Zhang explain his idea, only for Zhang to realize he had just spoken without thinking. As the wind whispered through the curtains, the friend excitedly told the girl about his comic book ideas, even though he never planned to write them himself. The room held a guitar and a radio to show off his love of music, while Zhang kept talking about his made-up comic book. Down the hall, a massive shoe cabinet stood proudly with Lu's boots and Zhang's shoes lined up beside it, everything looking perfectly neat. The guy excitedly shared the tale of how On became a soldier before others showed up, while Lu listened closely. She opened the door to her room, invited him inside, and gestured for him to make himself comfortable. With a grin, the girl invited Zhang to hang out in her cozy, girly room while she went to visit her dad. Every single thing sat exactly where it belonged, and the desk was so clean it looked like no one had even touched it in ages. Suddenly, the guy's eyes locked onto a book on the desk, and the shock hit him so hard he froze right there. It turned out to be a comic book called The Fateful Void, lying right there on the desk and standing out clearly. As the young man opened the book to read the story closely, he turned to Lu and asked if she truly enjoyed it. She ripped the book from his hands and snapped that her friend had left it there and she'd never read it. After Lu left the room, she told Zhang to sit down and leave her stuff alone, but her friend just waved him off without even listening. He smiled to himself, realizing his friend was still just a little girl who couldn't protect herself when things got serious. When Zhang saw the guitar by the bookshelf, he remembered how much Lu loved music as a kid and how she always asked him to listen to it. He stepped over to the radio, hit the power button, and a soft, quiet, and slightly sad melody instantly filled the room. As the familiar song played, Jang remembered his fun childhood days with Lu and felt warm in his heart. Lost in his memories, he closed his eyes with a peaceful smile, not noticing that his girlfriend had returned. When she asked how long he'd been making music, Jang rubbed his eyes like he was just waking up from a deep sleep. Lu stepped up to him and admitted he used to hate music, completely baffled by what made him love it so much now. Jang asked with doubt if she had found her father, and Lu tossed the glasses into his hands. After putting them on, the hero hoped to finally notice something strange about the people he knew so little about. But all the glasses' screen showed were tiny chips that hid the real story behind the information. Suddenly, everything around him vanished, and he slowly sank into the virtual world. He felt his body drop into a bottomless space of silence with no up or down. Wanting to see others, he opened his eyes and quietly looked around with surprise. Surrounded by endless darkness, dozens of glowing eyes watched him move, and there might have been hundreds of them. The young man stared in awe at the magical world of Shinjo, feeling only wonder instead of fear. That is where the others showed up, brutally killing people, tearing cities apart, and slowly eating away at the real world. They were so scary that they did terrifying things without a second thought because they had no conscience to stop them. As he watched the monsters, the young man struggled to make sense of them until a memory flashed back, reminding him that he had seen them before while he was in the hospital. As he floated in the weightless dark, a mysterious world appeared on his screens, showing a real place from the depths of space. Even though the night watch stood guard, monsters slipped through the open doors and sometimes managed to break right back into our world. An odd light shone on the young man as he carefully listened to the system's tale about the strange beings and what they could do. Standing among the towering skyscrapers, he learned that every 3 months, the thick layer of shadows would vanish to show the world exactly as it really is. Now that others have entered the world, even though the weakened layer let them pass, it's best for anyone below the 4th rank to stay out. As Jang's strength grew and his vision widened to reveal that the shadow layer's pollution was shifting, he was shocked to realize he had felt no change at all before. As he looked over the data about everyone else, a giant shadow suddenly rose behind him, waiting to strike at any second. Feeling a strange shift in the air, Jang instantly tensed and turned to face the darkness, only to be blinded by a sudden beam of light pouring down from the sky on a shadowy figure, leaving him wide-eyed and wondering what would happen next. The bright light annoyed everyone, and they growled in anger as they glared at it shining through the dark, tall buildings. Jang crossed his arms and stepped into a fighting stance, ready to strike his enemies the second they showed up. Jung was certain that only by mastering his own power could he defeat the monsters, so he had no doubt he would succeed. The boy decided to stay in the dark and fight the others instead of running away, determined not to miss his chance to become special. The boy stared in shock at the body before him, wondering if he could ever become like him after passing the wrestling exam. After a moment's thought, Jin realized that a special person was still human with a mind that could make its own choices. Jung realized that even though these special folks could control their power, that very strength was often what killed them. Special folks constantly fought against the smog that clung to them and the scary feeling of being all alone. Even after they died, there was still a strong chance they'd turn into something else because their bodies kept glowing with a strange power. When the bodies of special people were buried in dirt, they often did not realize that death was already waiting to catch up with them soon. The hero stood frozen, staring at the special bodies before him while trying to make sense of the shocking new truth he had just discovered. Suddenly, a massive beast stepped into view, its eyes blazing with such intensity that it nearly blinded him. The young man froze, not knowing what to do next, and suddenly found himself standing right in front of the huge monster. Suddenly, the recording cut out, the screen flashed so bright it blinded him, and then everything went pitch black. Jang took off his virtual reality glasses, amazed by what he had just seen, and couldn't hide the small smile on his face. The girl couldn't wait to know what he had discovered, but he told her there was too much to take in and he needed some time to think it through. Jang rubbed his neck, asked Lu for a massage, and when she snapped at him to repeat himself, he did. With a grin, he promised to hand over 3 of his original paintings and let her pick the one she loved the most. As he rubbed her shoulders, his girlfriend smiled slightly and said she'd take his kind offer because she loved art. Lu, not knowing why he needed a massage, asked what was wrong, and Jang explained that his neck ached from all his training. Curious, his friend asked if he was working on his abs, so Jang lifted his shirt to show her his six-pack. Suddenly, Uncle Lu popped into the doorway with an angry frown, and it turned out he was the girl's dad. Heavy silence fell as the boys and their uncle sat at the dinner table, carefully keeping their voices low to say nothing at all. The uncle held back his anger and ate his rice and meat quietly, while Jang watched his sharp moves and got even more nervous. Trying to soothe her dad, the girl kept eating with a smile and told him he'd gotten it all wrong. The father frowned in disbelief at his daughter's calmness and shouted at Jang for not speaking up, but the boy just kept eating quietly without saying a word. Instead of saying no, the young man stunned everyone by drinking his entire glass in one gulp, leaving Father Lu and the girl completely confused by what he meant. Feeling even more irritated, the man asked if the guy truly had any good reason to punish himself. As the man lunged at Jang and grabbed for a knife, his friend scrambled away, making excuses while Lu held back her father. Lu Jang and his childhood friend were totally opposite. While he was a mischievous prankster everyone avoided, she was a sweet, obedient girl who didn't mind his recklessness and always stayed by his side. Once, when Jang was just a kid, he rescued a girl and believed that was why they had been best friends ever since. Two unknown boys started bullying Lu, but Jang stepped up to defend her with strength and a ready-for-action attitude. Scared of the bullies, the girl cried out to her friend for help, hoping he would stand up for her and stop the teasing. With a mighty swing, the boy showed the courage to stand up for his friends and protect those he loved. Even though Jang acted like a homeless man, Lu stuck by his side, carrying a sign that begged for help. In those moments, everyone felt sorry for the girl and told her to stay away from him, especially since her father never let Lu get close to her, even though they had been friends and trusted each other for years. As the man lit his cigarette and kept a sharp eye on the boys, he tried to figure out their next move and read what they were really thinking. The girl watched her father smoke in front of her, fuming with annoyance at his bad habit. Lu stepped up to her dad, yanked the cigarette right out of his hand before he could light it, proving she was made of tough stuff. He spun around in anger and demanded to know what the kids were up to when he walked in, fearing they'd broken the house rules. Jang waved his arms and shouted that they were just looking at stories about other people to try to calm down his strict dad. Hearing this, the man stiffened and stared at the boy, trying to figure out if he could trust what he said and did. Laughing, the girl stuck her tongue out at Jang, playfully acting like their old childhood pranks and strong friendship were still going on. Suddenly smiling, the father sighed with relief, finally shaking off the heavy fears that had been weighing on his heart. The man turned to the young man with a serious look, ready to share some important things he wanted to teach him. Crossing his arms, the man asked Jang if he knew why the government hid the truth about other beings from students. Confused, the guy replied that he didn't quite get what was being said and tried hard to make sense of the words. He held a cigarette as he said that everyone carries a different kind of heart, and since evil sometimes wins, we don't need to know everything right away. The young man's eyes went wide with surprise, yet he kept listening closely to Father Lu, trying to remember every single word. As the man went on with his tale, he said that not everyone has enough strength to handle themselves, because sometimes other people can really drive folks crazy. The man declared with force that if a crack appears in the heart, another can slip right through it, making it very dangerous for the person. With his companion keeping quiet, Father Lu explained that this silence is the exam itself, proving that only the strong are worthy to touch the lives of others. The world was full of danger, and frightening visions of a young man's death kept flashing in his mind to show him the terrible threat. The man explained that even with today's best medical tools, people could still lose control. Then he asked the young man if he understood everything. With a smile, the character replied that he understood everything, nodded in agreement with his uncle's instructions, and showed he was completely serious. With a hand placed over his heart, he declared he couldn't miss his martial arts exam, while another voice calmly assured him there was no need to worry. With his fist tight, the uncle was ready to argue with the young man until his phone rang, cutting off the fight and pulling his focus away. The commander took a call about a new mission in the shadow layer, listening closely while Jin watched him. Once he heard the order, the man nodded that he got it and rushed toward the exit to get the job done fast. Turning around, the uncle warned Jang to back off, promising to drag him to the night watch unit for service if he didn't. With a smile, the young man promised not to hurt the daughter, but Lu flew into a rage and spat at him while pinching her friend's cheeks in anger, leaving the girl confused as he playfully grabbed her own cheeks back with a mischievous grin. A fresh morning broke, and folks strolled calmly through the busy streets while a kid sat high on his dad's shoulders and vendors called out to sell their goods. The boy happily chewed on sugar-coated hawthorn berries on long skewers right beside his father, feeling truly joyful. One of the billboards showed pictures of the night watch crew, the folks who did their best to help everyone out. As Jang stared at it, he longed to learn more, but as always, all he received was just the bare minimum. The young man walked down the aisles of the grocery store with a basket in his hands, putting food inside it. When he spotted a bottle of soy sauce, Jang grabbed it right away because he loved Asian food. The young man grumbled that Uncle Lou's reaction meant the secrets he'd found about other people would be kept hidden. Jung paused to answer his ringing cell phone while he was loading groceries into the basket. Lou started listing things he needed to buy with an irritated tone, but then suddenly told him to forget it. As he walked up to the shelves with hygiene products at Ware, the hero realized that the girl was just embarrassed by him and never asked him to buy sanitary pads. Smiling at his friend, he felt nothing but happiness that he could help with those purchases. Walking home with the bag, the guy worried that school was almost over and his shadow training power was fading away. The sky was bright, the trees danced gently in the warm air, and everything looked perfectly safe. As Jang walked along, he noticed the rumors against others growing stronger every day, and when he saw far too many people signing up for the wrestling exam, he felt his anger rising. He decided to stop and looked up at the sky because something surprised him greatly, and he felt tension. As clouds and a giant moon suddenly filled the dark sky, he felt a terrible chill creeping around him. Jang took the bag and convinced himself he'd been overthinking it, so he stretched out his arms and waved them around in every direction. Suddenly changing his path home, he turned the corner into a quiet alley so he could walk in silence without making a single sound. Suddenly, a black shadow started creeping out from under his feet, getting bigger and bigger until he came to a halt. Jung saw the abyss widening, meaning a door to a dark world filled with monsters and danger had opened. Slowly, the hero sank into the dark void until only he remained, standing ready to fight as he shouted into the darkness to see who was watching him. At the street's end, he felt someone was hiding in the dark alley, but he couldn't tell who it was or why they wouldn't show themselves. Slowly, a man stepped out of the shadows with a blood bar showing just 14%, and Jang knew he was in deep trouble. Huge wounds tore through his body, pouring out blood, yet he kept walking straight toward Jang. His eyes were empty and his face covered in blood, showing he wasn't himself and looked like he was in a trance. Not even puzzled, the character recognized his neighbor from the same building and asked why he was wandering in the dark world. The boy dropped to his knees at Jen's feet, too tired to speak, while she stared in shock at everything going wrong around them. The pipe covered in blood rested near the young man's body, while Jenong watched silently from far away, left confused by the sudden violence and unable to help the fighter who was now deeply wounded. After losing so much blood and strength, the neighbor finally lifted his head and tried to stand up, even though it hurt. Soon, Jang saw kids crying by a wall while another child moved toward them. The shadow straightened and screamed in terror, while the boy hugged the girl tight, doing everything he could to keep her safe. Jang stood frozen in shock at what he saw, knowing he had to stand up for the kids. Jang rolled up his sleeves in anger and got ready to strike, knowing he had seen that shadow before and it had only scared him. Out on the city's edge, the night watchman let out a heavy sigh as he realized how much work had piled up on him lately. As a civilian, he thought the night watch was an honorable job, but the overtime work and regret over passing the exam made him change his mind. Suddenly, a cry for help echoed from deep in the street, and the warrior froze in surprise, squinting to see who was calling out. A massive shadow dragged a boy and a girl who were screaming for help and trying to escape, but the dark world was too strong to let them go. The rescuer was shocked, wondering if someone really wanted to drag the children into darkness, because he had never seen anything like this in all his years of work. The twisting dark hole grew stronger, pulling the kids deeper and deeper into the abyss until they seemed to vanish into the dark world. The boy threw himself forward with every bit of strength he had, leaping toward the kids just in time to catch them and keep them safe. The hero sprinted to help and tried to grab the kids' hands, but a dark power tugged them tighter and tighter. In a final second, he managed to grab one child by the hands, feeling relieved that at least one of them was saved. But suddenly, the darkness swallowed him and the children, making his heart race with fear. The young man stood frozen before the vast void, feeling a crushing weight on his chest and struggling to keep his balance as he tried to make sense of the chaos around him. With wide eyes of horror and surprise, the fighter got ready to face the others, knowing these creatures could do anything. After falling from space, the warrior and the children struggled to figure out where they were while dealing with the pain of their crash landing. Feeling annoyed, the character thought it was all over, realizing he'd been pulled into the dark world without any weapons. Suddenly, a strange light filled the room and a black shadow appeared, making the children scream in horror as they couldn't believe what they were seeing. Refusing to give up, the warrior fought until the very last moment, driven by one goal: to shield the children from the coming darkness. The young man swung his leg side to side to hit the shadow, but when it didn't work, he knew his opponent was much stronger. The soldier kicked away the shadow, feeling a short-lived surge of power and hope that it had finally been struck down. As the kid stared at him in awe, the warrior felt his broken heart heal and sadly accepted that he would never go home again. The warrior glanced around nervously, seeing strangers everywhere who might strike at any second. Just as a shadow loomed before the hero, he feared he'd lost all his skills from talking too much with ordinary folks. Hearing the children's cries behind him, the young man felt so helpless he struggled to keep his cool. With tears streaming down their faces, the frightened children clung to their mother, pleading for safety as they tried to understand the scary things going on around them. When he pressed the bracelet, he knew he could only send a warning and wait for help to arrive. When he pressed the button, the bracelet glowed red to show it was working, and the young man crossed his fingers that someone would notice and save him before it was too late. As the warrior passed the bracelet to the children, he gently urged them to settle down, promising that the charm would shield them from the bad air and that he would bring them home as soon as he could. Thinking the bracelet couldn't save him, he handed it to the kids and realized their lives now hung on luck. As the girl looked closely at the bracelet, the boy asked if the man would truly let them take it home. The warrior forced a calm look to keep his promise and told the kids to stay right by his side. At the same time, a giant black shadow with burning eyes and a huge toothy mouth moved toward them, looking scary and dangerous. At 18, he passed his martial arts test and joined the university program. From the very start, he worked his hardest to build a strong base and dreamed of becoming a real night watchman soon. By his second year, he shocked his teachers by winning the fight against everyone else and showing he could do much more. The fighter felt proud of his wins in school and life, confident that only more victories were waiting for him. But he quickly learned that skill wasn't enough to beat them, because their world and powers were far more complicated than he had ever imagined. In that world, hard work wasn't the most important thing, and soon other students started winning big on their missions. Defeated and full of doubt, the soldier kept training hard, believing that if he just kept going, he would finally succeed, though every step forward felt much harder and much slower than before. The young man refused to believe in fate and trained his body to the breaking point in the gym, but he still couldn't break through the invisible wall that held him back. Soon he had to switch to helping people as a regular night watchman. Now he felt like he was staring at his own shadow, and the thought terrified him because his old mistakes came rushing back to haunt him. As the hero stepped closer, the other man let out a fierce growl and lunged, leaving the hero frozen and unsure of what to do next. Seeing the beast on all fours and looking half-human, the guy figured he was facing an opponent of medium strength. The monster roared with a huge mouth full of sharp teeth and tongue, warning its victim that death was coming. As the attack loomed, the fighter tightened his fists, knowing he had to guard the children at any price, even if this was his final fight. Just as one body vanished, a bloody patch of flesh took its place, leaving the hero baffled and trying to make sense of the sudden change. As he slowly closed the distance to the man, the other guy readied himself to strike while instinctively raising his hands to block the coming blow. The warrior chose to fight the monster, so he lifted onto his toes and prepared to leap into the air. As he soared up, the hero slammed a mighty punch right into the monster's face, knowing he was the one in control. Smiling at himself, the young man felt his blow had been perfect, and that sense of success brought his confidence right back. The monster's next move shocked the young man, leaving him staring in surprise at his opponent with no way to defend himself. The monster swung its long arm with all its might, smashing its opponent aside and leaving him no chance to dodge or lessen the blow. As the warrior landed close to the wall to catch his breath, the other fighter kept circling above him, waiting for the perfect chance to strike again. He cursed softly and tried to move away, but his body couldn't keep up with his mind, leaving him too slow to escape. The other fighter lunged for the young man's legs again, but the hero slipped out of the way with ease and stayed steady on his feet. The fighter rolled and twisted to dodge the monster's strikes, but he knew his strength would soon run out. Even though he could move fast like the wind, the soldier felt scared for his own life and the children's, not knowing how this fight would end. As he tried to run from the monster, his body turned heavy and felt like it was being stabbed by thousands of needles, locking him in place. The monster lumbered along like a slow-moving spider, giving the guy just enough time to sprint to a safe spot. With his fists tight and running no longer an option, the guy knew he had to fight to stay alive. Determined to fight with his bare hands, the warrior swung with all his last strength, while the blind monster, feeling superior, let out a roar and prepared for its next move. The soldier swung his arm hard, landing a blow that knocked his opponent to the ground and threw him off balance. As pain surged through his body, the young man realized the infection was spreading and that someone like him, with no special training, couldn't keep using his powers for long. The monster gathered its strength, bared its sharp teeth, and let out a terrifying roar that scared away anyone who dared to get close. As the beast lunged again, the hero saw that taking a risk was the only way to save himself and his children. He chose to use his power, swung his arm, and a bright flash of light filled the air. Realizing he had hurt himself, the hero coughed up blood and felt his strength fading until he was overpowered, fell to the ground, and could no longer stand or fight. Just before he hit the ground, his body flipped over and over, making the crash far worse as he slammed down. As the soldier coughed, he saw that his opponent had already learned his moves, making his old tricks useless. As the monster came closer, the young man thought any combat student could handle it, but the gap in their talent made it hard for him. As the defender swung once more, he knew he couldn't beat the monster, so instead of giving up, he searched for a weak spot to strike. With heavy hits, the monster was causing harm, but the hero kept fighting just long enough to wait for the help he had already called for. As the scene unfolded, the kids sat right beside it, their eyes wide with horror, shaking as they feared for their lives. When the guard looked at the children, his eyes went wide with shock, and he knew he had to keep fighting even though he was tired and hurting. Even though it hurt, he kept pushing himself up again and again, refusing to let go of the kids he needed to protect. After a while, the monster finally landed a hit that sent the guy tumbling to the ground, and the hero felt his strength fading away. After touching down, the guy couldn't believe his strength was fading, so he gritted his teeth and squeezed out every last bit of energy to get back up. In the mirror, he stared at someone else staring back, convinced he was dying, and his fear and hopelessness froze him so hard he couldn't move a muscle. He carried the memory of his family being taken from him at age 15, a painful truth that always pushed him to keep fighting. That's why at 18, he chose to start learning martial arts so he could protect himself. The young man dreamed of a bright future at college, but life kept crushing those dreams. At just 20, he was kicked out of his second year of school, stealing away his only chance to train in peace and grow stronger. At just 21, he joined the night watch crew as a civilian while still reading books to learn everything he could. For a century of battling enemies, he never found peace, only hoping they would step back and let the people survive. Death became the everyday reality as people gave up their last hopes and stopped fighting, leaving the world to only those who kept struggling. Thinking about it, the warrior figured using powers was normal, but he still reached into his pocket to do something about it. The young man popped the blue strength-boosting capsule into his mouth, praying it would help him win. With eyes wide open and glowing purple, the character looked up, hinting that a hidden power was about to appear. Before he died, the hero found his inner strength to stand up and face his final battle. With a blue glow, the man's body healed before the monster's eyes while the warrior studied its every move, feeling a surge of strength that fueled his new plan to predict and counter every attack. As he wiped blood from his face, the fighter knew the second round had started and he'd have to use every ounce of strength to keep the children safe. He slowly stepped closer to his opponent, who gripped his fists tight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Filled with fury and fear, the defender screamed and charged forward, knowing that if he failed, he would die right alongside the children. Springing to his feet, he just barely dodged the shadow's long, deadly arms as they swung at him. With one sharp kick, the hero sent the monster stumbling back and took off enough health to leave it dizzy for a moment. The mighty punch knocked the creature aside and made it roar in pain, but the young boy didn't stop. He kept charging right on. His hands burned with a blue flame, pouring all his strength and power into the energy he was gathering. As he struck the monster again and again on its face, he felt stronger and happier as he saw his attacks work. His eyes burned with fury, driving him to push past his limits and strike even harder. The warrior kept hammering the monster's head so hard it screamed, hoping to finally end the fight. As the man's power faded and his world began to spin, his strikes missed their mark while the monster stepped closer, ready to strike back with all its might. Staring at his own hands, the hero knew he had to do everything possible to win and save the kids from danger. Even though his whole body was riddled with cuts and his legs felt weak as cotton, he pushed on and kept fighting. The monster grabbed the young man with its giant hand, delivering a blow he couldn't escape. With a loud crash and a cloud of dust, the guy was knocked to the side, felt the sting of the hit, and got ready to jump right back into the fight. Blood gushed from the back of his head, showing he wasn't skilled enough to win, and for a split second, he went completely blind. Bleeding heavily, the angry warrior blamed himself for failing even with pills, and as he sank into dark thoughts about his ordinary life ending, a sudden voice made him spin around to find Jin anxiously asking what was happening and quickly checking his condition. Lying in a pool of blood, the guy tried to figure out who this person was, wondering if he was just part of the night watch or someone special. As he stepped closer, the stranger seized his shoulders tightly and urged him to relax, draw on his inner strength, and trust him completely. Jang rubbed his hands together with a small smile, clutching his groceries while steeling himself for the fierce fight that waited ahead. As the warrior watched the fight and saw the other guy punch the stranger in the face, he realized that the man was connected to the dark world. The sharp hit knocked him flat onto the ground with a dull thud, kicking up a thick cloud of dust. So stunned by what he saw, the fighter decided the guy looked too weak to even put up a real fight. As Jang fought fiercely with the other guy, the soldier pulled himself together, took a deep breath, and slowly stood up. Feeling a sudden rush of power, the hero swung his arms wildly in every direction, hoping to accidentally strike the monster. Seeing the warrior stand up, the other moved forward and halted before him even as he frantically waved his arms. After trying many times, the young fighter finally landed a few hits on his opponent's body, taking away just a little of his strength. Jang was furious at this twist, because he was desperate to join the battle and prove his strength against a terrifying foe. He pulled a bottle of soy sauce from his bag, glared at the parasite, and shouted that he was his enemy. A pale green moon rose up in the dark sky, bathing everything in a spooky light that made the night feel strange and scary. Jang and his opponent fought on, with the warrior gripping the bottle tight just as the monster hit him. The fighter chose to turn the weapon against the monster, so he flung the shard hard onto the ground to fight back. With only a few seconds left, the young guy spun around and lunged for a sharp bottle piece to fight back. The monster growled loudly as it lifted its giant, spider-like paws to show off its awesome power. The monster turned its back to the hero and lifted its paws one by one as John crept up behind it with a glass rose in hand. He managed to smash a shard of glass right into the monster's back, making it let out a low growl and stumble forward. Young Grimston struck the beast with wild, unpredictable force because he knew exactly how his enemy fought. The warrior smashed the monster with a sharp piece of glass, landing hard hits to quickly weaken it. As the monster grew weak and screamed in unbearable pain, its eerie, piercing howl shook the very walls of the buildings. The other hit knocked the giant beast sideways, and it just stood there in silence while its enemy fought to get back up. Sitting on the sidelines, the fighter watching the battle suddenly saw that his opponent wasn't weak at all, and realized there were no rules to their fight. Suddenly, a wild pain pierced the hero's body as his eyes widened in horror while the monster slashed him with one of its paws. Jang ran out of strength and slammed into the wall with a thud, leaving a big dent from the powerful hit. The warrior coughed in shame, realizing he'd made a terrible mistake by charging into the same trap twice. The monster didn't let go, growled loudly, and got ready to strike again with glowing red eyes full of anger. Seeing the scared kids, Jang knew he couldn't let the monster get close to them. The hero turned to the young man and realized that if he let them stay, the monster would kill everyone without mercy, so he had to grab them and move. After Jang, the warrior yelled that the monster's right rib was broken and told everyone to strike there to win. Jang moved so fast he was a blur, shouting that he got it all and charging forward with wild determination to strike. Unable to follow the enemy's fast moves, the monster stood aside and watched every step with a wide grin, while Jang felt a surge of power within him and was ready to defeat the monster no matter what, even if it meant losing his own life. The young man slipped quickly out of the way, jumping from one side of the giant monster to the other to avoid its heavy hits. The hero stepped up to the monster and smashed a broken bottle down on its head. With blood gushing out and pain tearing through him, the monster let out a loud, piercing growl that made the hiding children scream in terror. Slowly fading, the monster pulled back to the side while Jang stood his ground, gripping a broken bottle without flinching. Confused by the enemy's weird moves, the fighter guessed the monster was just planning to run off. The monster zoomed past the hero who was leaning against the wall and kept going, while the confused young man just kept watching it go. Noticing the monster moving toward the kids, the young man screamed as loud as he could, telling it to stay away. As the monster stepped nearer, the kids flattened themselves against the floor, praying to stay out of its angry reach. With its sharp teeth bared, the mutant crouched low, ready to spring and attack the scared kids. The scary beast crept nearer to the shaking kids who froze in terror, not knowing which way to run to stay safe. As the beast soared up to the boy, it yawned wide to reveal a dark shadow swirling inside its mouth, like a hole that had swallowed the world. The kid screamed in terror as the beast gnashed its huge teeth, ready to strike. As the mutant's paw reached for the child's face, A loud shout demanded it stop while Zhang frantically rummaged through the grocery bag, finally throwing a soda can at the monster with all his might to distract it from the kids. The can flew toward the monster faster and faster, whistling through the air like a weapon that could save the kids. Soon the can hit the enemy's body but passed straight through him without causing any harm. As Jung flung the can aside, another man stood up and readied himself to strike the enemy and finish their mission. Watching this, the fighter clenched his teeth in fury, desperate to save the children but feeling powerless to do so. With a leap, the hero charged the monster head-on, ready to kill it even if the price was his own life. Even though the boy was covered in blood and his wounds were bad, he kept fighting just to keep the kids safe. The soldier struck the distracted mutant hard in the chest, causing him to let out a roar of pain right in front of the children. Mid-air, the monster twisted and flung the warrior down, leaving him gasping and on the verge of passing out. His health bar kept sinking until death, with its icy fingers, was right there waiting to grab him. The fighter spat out blood from the hard hit and knew he had almost no strength left to keep fighting. The mutant spat blood onto the hero's face, showing off its teeth and raising a clawed paw ready to strike. The beast lunged forward with a gaping mouth full of spit and sharp teeth to grab the weakened young man, but it didn't see Zhang jump out from behind and seize its head. With a sneer, the soldier grabbed his enemy and screamed in rage, demanding he finally die and stop hurting the kids. Filled with rage, Zhang bit down hard on the monster's neck, making it gasp and freeze in pure terror. The mutant grew weak from the bloody assault, and his health plummeted to a sad 14%. The warrior yanked the enemy by his hair, slammed him down hard, and held him fast so he couldn't get up. Zhang kept kicking his opponent and rushed forward until the beast whimpered like a helpless dog. As the life bar fell to a dangerous 11%, the enemy grew weak and sluggish. Zhang chose to fight hand-to-hand, punching with such force that he tore his enemy apart. With every hit, fiery circles burst into life, and the beast let out a pain-filled howl while the hero kept charging forward. Full of rage, he kept pounding on the mutant, refusing to stop until the creature was finally dead. The creature screamed and twisted in agony as it tried to escape the deadly hold, but it was already too late to save itself. Chang's next hit landed right on his foe's eye, sending a spray of blood that turned his hands bright red. Fearless, the warrior wanted to end the fight quickly and finish his opponent before he could recover from his wounds. As Jung kept hitting from above, a weird energy slowly exploded out of the mutant's body. With one last strike, Zhang tore the monster's body in half, sending it into a final, wild scream before life left it for good. Blood from the defeated enemy poured down his face and body as he panted hard, fighting to find strength again. The fight shook the ground so hard that big rocks fell down with a loud crash, making it look like the earth was breaking apart under their feet. Barrels and debris shot into the air, and a strange black shadow spread beneath Zhang like a sudden whirlwind. The wild power sent stones and cans soaring through the air once more, only to crash down with a dull thud not far from the hero. The asphalt couldn't take the fighting anymore and cracked, sending stones and sand flying across the street. Right then, the kids and soldiers sat right there, staring in shock as everything happened before them. Zhang stood up and let out a heavy sigh after the fight, but blood still dripped down his face and stained his chin. With a crooked grin, he declared that he had finally taken revenge on his enemy for all the evil he did and the pain he caused, and saved the children. Suddenly, the fighter felt his senses fading as the world around him blurred, and the ground seemed to vanish beneath him. His head was so dizzy he felt like he was falling, flailing his arms as if trying to catch invisible air to stay upright. Just as he watched, the dark shadow that belonged to him and its dark world clone both appeared, and though he slowly closed his eyes, the shadow stayed right there, waiting for him to give up. With his eyes barely open, Zhang's last sight was a strange and impossible shape hiding in the dark. Fires swallowed the streets, twisting the traffic lights, and sending sparks flying everywhere until the heat became impossible to stand. Huge buildings erupted into giant flames and crumbled as fire tore through them, leaving dead bodies scattered everywhere in the thick smoke and ash. Suddenly, fresh fires erupted all over the city and quickly grew into massive, roaring blazes. Zhenong stood frozen amidst the smoke and dead bodies, shocked that the gathering place was now just ruins, until a strange sense of movement broke the terrifying silence and made him wonder what was happening. He spun around to see his body slowly getting swallowed by a quiet flock of shadows that filled every inch of space around him. In the dark, their red eyes glowed as the monsters growled with bared teeth, showing him that he was up against the others. Their scary paws reached out, and their claws swished through the air without hurting him, like they were just checking how strong he was. Suddenly, the young man felt a strange tug beneath him that dragged him toward the ground, forcing him to look down. Suddenly, a dark pit opened up under his feet, starting to swallow him whole, and Jang screamed loudly for help as he fought to stay alive. The giant whirlpool in the depths didn't just pull him in, it grabbed everything around him, dragging stones and wall debris into its massive spin. The flames kept roaring, and as new fires spread across the city, everything around him slowly turned into total chaos. The sun vanished into the blackness, leaving the whole world in shadow and stealing any hope of rescue. Suddenly, a familiar voice woke Young, and he realized that everything he just lived through was only a nightmare caused by losing consciousness. The fallen enemy lay on the ground nearby, and though he breathed hard, he pulled himself together to tell his friend he was okay. Staring at the defeated enemy, Jang suddenly realized that his memories of everything that had just happened were gone. When he poked his finger into the other's eye, he saw that the scary shadow actually had real pupils hiding deep inside. Feeling relieved, the young man smiled with joy at his victory, letting pride warm his heart even though the horror of what had happened still lingered. Puzzled by the strange sight of the fighter standing despite losing so much blood, the warrior asked if everything was all right, but the hero remained silent, leaving Jang amazed at how frightening the situation seemed. Just as suddenly, his friend grabbed his shoulder, and he spun around, eyes wide with confusion, wondering what had just happened. He pointed to the buildings close by and said they should sit against a strong wall to rest and get their strength back. Exhausted and nearly powerless, they slumped against the stone wall as weariness drained their very last bit of strength. Turning to his friend, the young man asked if a stranger belonged to the night watch because his strength was so strange, while Jang smiled and wondered why they didn't recognize each other after living in the same house and walking the same streets. Closing his eyes, he whispered that he belonged to no group, and the young boy fell quiet, lost in deep thought. With a smile, the warrior told the other man that he was too strong to believe Jiang wasn't a guard, even though the guards were incredibly strong, while Jiang couldn't understand such talk after he had just saved the other man's life at the cost of his own. Seeing how Jiang's amazing strength could catch anyone off guard, he praised him for his fighting skill. The guy flailed his arms and laughed so hard that the hero, watching him, asked if he was all right. Not understanding,